Ibrahim Traore, a name evocative of inspiration and revolution in our current politics, whose actions in Burkina Faso in cooperation with General Tchiani of Niger and General Goïta of Mali have dared to challenge what they view as neocolonialism by their old colonial master France. France, a prosperous and powerful nation in Western Europe, carries a history and a present marked by imperialism and colonialism. In this video, we uncover France's deep-rooted imperialism in West Africa and ask the crucial question: can this grip ever truly be broken? Before diving into today's politics, let's first take a step back to understand the history of French imperialism. According to Wikipedia, imperialism is the maintaining and extending of power over foreign nations, particularly through expansionism, employing both hard power, military and economic power, and soft power, diplomatic power and cultural imperialism. Imperialism focuses on establishing or maintaining hegemony and a more formal empire. While related to the concept of colonialism, imperialism is a distinct concept that can apply to other forms of expansion and many forms of government. France's involvement in Africa began well before the famous Scramble for Africa in the late 19th century. Early contacts, 16th to 18th century. French traders and explorers reached West Africa's coasts mainly for gold, ivory, and later the transatlantic slave trade. They set up trading posts in Senegal, Gambia, and along the coast. Colonial foothold, 17th to 18th century. France gradually took control of areas in Senegal, the Caribbean slave routes, and parts of North Africa, notably Algeria in 1830, which became the cornerstone of French African presence. Expansion, 19th century. By the mid-1800s, France wanted a larger empire, both for economic gain, resources, markets, and national prestige, especially after losing colonies to Britain. France's role in the Scramble for Africa, 1880s to 1914. The Scramble for Africa refers to the rush by European powers to seize African lands, formalized by the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 85. France was one of the biggest players. Berlin Conference, 1884 to 85. The French, along with the British, Germans, Belgians, and others, divided Africa into spheres of influence. France sought to control a continuous strip of land from the Atlantic, West Africa, to the Red Sea, East Africa. Major French territories gained: North Africa, Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, West Africa, Senegal, Mali, Côte d'Ivoire, Guinea, Burkina Faso, Benin, Niger, Mauritania, Central Africa, Chad, Central African Republic, Congo-Brazzaville, Gabon, Madagascar, and smaller islands, Comoros, Réunion, Mayotte. This meant that France's empire became the second largest in Africa after Britain's. Their goal was to spread French language, culture, and political influence. The idea of mission civilisatrice, civilizing mission. They also had clashes with Britain over territories, as France and Britain nearly went to war over territory, most famously in the Fashoda Incident, 1898, in Sudan. Eventually, both sides compromised, but it showed how tense the scramble was. Some of the notable men who were the pathfinders of French expansion into Africa: Jean-Baptiste Colbert, 1619 to 1683. He was an architect, not an explorer. Though he was never in Africa himself, Colbert was Louis XVI's finance minister. He pushed France into overseas trade and colonization. He founded the Compagnie du Sénégal in 1673, which set up French forts and trading posts in West Africa. Louis Faidherbe, 1818-1889, governor of Senegal, 1854-1865. Expanded French control inland along the Senegal River. Built forts, promoted trade, and subdued local resistance. the most notable of these local insurrections being the resistance of the Tukulur Empire under El Hadj Umar Tall in 1957. He is widely considered the true founder of French West Africa. Paul Soleil, 1842 to 1886, an explorer who tried to open trade routes across the Sahara, Algeria to Senegal, advocated linking French North and West Africa. Pierre Savorgnan de Brazza, 1852–1905, was an Italian-born French explorer. He explored the Congo River Basin in the 1870s to 1880s, signed treaties with local rulers that allowed France to claim Congo-Brazzaville, hence the capital city Brazzaville is named after him. Joseph Gallieni, 1849–1916, began as a military officer in West Africa, Senegal, Upper Niger, parts of modern-day Mali and Guinea. Later, famous as a colonial administrator in Madagascar and Indochina. Known for his pacification campaigns, a mix of military action and building colonial administration. France's African empire was built through force, coercive treaties, and economic exploitation. French forces marched inland and forced treaties of friendship and protection, effectively ceding local kingdoms to Paris. Colonizers then imposed direct rule. They abolished pre-colonial governments and appointed French officials and loyal chefs de canton to collect taxes, enforce labor, and control trade. The colonial ideology was assimilation. Africans were told they could become French citizens by adopting French culture. In reality, only a tiny elite benefited. Just 4 Senegalese communes, Dakar, Gorée, Saint-Louis, and Rufisque, ever gained full French citizenship rights. The rest remained second-class subjects. Economically, France ruthlessly extracted wealth. It seized plantation lands, e.g. groundnuts and gum arabic in Senegal, and built railroads, roads linking mines and farms to ports. In earlier centuries, France stood as one of the major powers in the transatlantic slave trade, carrying about 12% of all Africans sold to the Americas, and it continued forced labor in colonies under different names such as conscripted labor, indigenous codes, etc. In short, French colonization combined a self-professed civilizing mission, language, schools, policy of assimilation. With brutal control, armies quelled revolts such as the Wolof uprisings in Kayor in modern-day Senegal, puppet chiefs enforced taxes, and millions of Africans toiled for the benefit of the metropole. Despite the formal end of empire, France maintained tight economic and political control, a system often called Françafrique. Paris replaced colonization with cooperation, yet ran the former colonies through a network of loyal African and French elites. 1. Military presence. France retains permanent bases in Djibouti, Gabon, Senegal, Côte d'Ivoire, and intervened repeatedly. Gabon 1964, Chad 1980s, Côte d'Ivoire 2002, Mali 2013. The French usually justify their military presence on the pretext of counterterrorism and security protection. France argues that its forces are there to fight terrorist groups that threaten regional and international security, not only for African stability, but also to prevent those groups from expanding toward Europe. Operation Serval, 2013, and Barkhane, 2014 to 2022, were officially framed as emergency responses to jihadist advances in Mali and then across the Sahel. However, some Sahel governments have accused France of creating and aiding the insurgents, albeit without publicly verifiable proof. France denies this. European ransom practices, often opaque, sometimes denied, injected millions into AQUIM and allied coffers, strengthening jihadist networks in the Sahel. A striking example is the AQUIM ransom case involving French hostages in Niger, 2010 to 2013. 4 French nationals, employed by a French uranium mining company, were kidnapped by al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb in 2010. According to media outlets such as Le Monde, a ransom of 20 million euros was allegedly paid for their release in 2013, though the French government denied this, insisting the outcome resulted from diplomatic efforts led by Niger. The hostages had been held in Mali for 3 years, and their eventual release came at a time when French nuclear giant Areva was engaged in sensitive negotiations with Nigerian officials. The 2011 Libya intervention by NATO indirectly fueled Sahel conflicts via arms proliferation. There were also documented civilian harm incidents and deadly protest crackdowns involving French forces, which undermined local support and likely helped jihadist narratives. One clear example is the Bounty airstrike in central Mali in January 2021. French forces carried out an airstrike, claiming they had targeted armed jihadists. However, a United Nations investigation later found that at least 19 civilians attending a wedding ceremony were killed in the strike. This incident fueled anger against the French presence in Mali and was widely exploited by jihadist groups to portray France as an aggressor. Political manipulation. France backed coups and assassinations against radicals, for example in Mali and Congo-Brazzaville, while supporting loyalists, House Negroes like Senghor and Houphouët Boigny. Leaders who resisted Paris often faced sanctions, coups, or assassinations. Some notable leaders who were overthrown in Hao: Roubenham Nyobe of Cameroon, founder of the UPC and known as the spokesman of the people, was a powerful voice for Cameroon's independence. His speeches and appeals to the UN made him a major threat to France, which banned his party in 1955. Forced into hiding, he was hunted down and assassinated by French forces in 1958, an attempt to silence the symbol of Cameroonian resistance. Sylvanus Olympio of Togo, murdered in 1963, coup led by Sergeant Etienne Eyadema. French commander implicated. Sergeant Eyadema would later become General Gnassingbé Eyadema, Togo's infamous long-ruling dictator between 1967 to 2005. Eyadema himself later admitted he fired the shots that killed Olympio outside the U.S. Embassy in Lomé. Laurent Gbagbo of Côte d'Ivoire. The historian-turned-president rose to power in Côte d'Ivoire in 2000 as the face of opposition against decades of one-party rule. He branded himself a nationalist, standing up to French influence and foreign meddling. But his rule was marred by civil war, ethnic division, and violent crackdowns. In 2010, after losing elections to Alassane Ouattara, Gbagbo refused to step down, claiming electoral fraud, plunging the nation into chaos that claimed thousands of lives. French troops and UN forces removed him, and he was sent to the International Criminal Court on charges of crimes against humanity. Years later, he was acquitted, returning home to massive crowds who hailed him as a hero who stood up to neocolonialism. Although there are those who still see him as a symbol of stubborn leadership that dragged Côte d'Ivoire into bloodshed, he is widely viewed as hero. Sékou Touré of Guinea. In 1958, Guinea's leader Sékou Touré stunned the world by rejecting France's offer to remain in its colonial orbit. Famously saying, "We prefer poverty and freedom to riches and slavery," he was the only African leader to vote no in de Gaulle's referendum. France reacted with fury. Overnight, French officials abandoned Guinea, stripping offices bare, destroying records, and cutting off all aid and trade. The young nation was left isolated, punished for daring to be free. Touré turned to the Soviet Union and other socialist allies, but the pressure never stopped. French agents and exiled Guineans plotted coups, while neighboring pro-French states gave them refuge. The most dramatic moment came in 1970, when Portuguese commandos and Guinean exiles invaded Conakry in Operation Green Sea, hoping to overthrow him. Touré barely escaped, but survived, tightening his rule and emerging as a symbol of African defiance, scarred, isolated, but unbroken. Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso. A Burkinabe soldier, revolutionary, and Pan-African hero who became president of Upper Volta in 1983 at just 33 years old. He renamed the country Burkina Faso, meaning land of upright people, and set out to prove that true independence meant more than just waving a flag. It meant self-reliance, dignity, and justice. He rejected foreign aid, saying, "He who feeds you controls you." Sankara launched massive campaigns to fight corruption, empower women, and promote education and health. He planted millions of trees to combat desertification, encouraged citizens to produce and wear local clothing, and banned luxury for government officials, even selling off the state's fleet of Mercedes cars. But his boldness made him enemies. He criticized Western exploitation and the African elite who served it. In 1987, he was assassinated in a coup led by his own best friend Blaise Compaoré, widely believed to have French backing. Even in death, Sankara's legacy burns bright, a symbol of African pride, integrity, and fearless resistance against neocolonialism. His spirit still inspires generations who dream of a free and self-determined Africa, as there are those who believe that Ibrahim Traore is a reincarnation of Thomas Sankara.